Yes, ma'am? Yes, yes. 1000 Rockhurst, Rockhurst Drive. Unit A is an Adam. Highlands Ranch 80129. You're welcome. Bye-bye. Thanks for all your help today. I might get it out without screaming and yelling and jumping up and down. It's close. It's close today. I gotta tell you. I don't remember having this much trouble last year with this thing.
Yeah.
I really think he didn't send it in the right form. I really think that's what it is. So I'll have to. At least I got the major portion of it done. The bottom portion, which is for reserves, we'll talk about because there's many things that may or may not be in there. So
Yeah.
hence contributing to my white hair here. Hello, Miss Sarah.
How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. Good to see you.
Thank you.
I haven't been into the office much, so
Well,
good.
anytime you're here, I'm here off and on. So there we go. We'll see who else likes to join us today. Otherwise, it'll be a real short class. It'll be just you. Which will be fun. All good. Well, I'll give it a couple more minutes and then it may be just you, Miss Sarah. All right, let's get started and see if anybody else wants to come in. Just a second here.
Sure.
Okay. All righty, let me go to share the screen. Oop. Hang on, I got to go back here just a second. Let's see what we're doing here. Okay. Let's do this one. Share. Oh, we got Thomas. Okay. I'm having trouble getting to where I need to be. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so what we're going to do is go down to where we have dates and deadlines. That seems to be a huge struggle for most agents, and I certainly understand why. However, let's go through and understand who does what, okay? The first date is the time of day deadline. So this means that if you have a deadline in your contract other than your closing date and time and acceptance date and time, you'd like to have, excuse me, your contract on any disclosures or whatever by 6 p.m. or anywhere from 6 to 9. If you go much past 9 o'clock, usually the buyer and or the seller are not in real good frame of mind. They don't concentrate well at that late at night. When you go even farther into the night, it creates even more problems because the fact is that everybody's tired, somebody's had a glass of wine or two, and nobody remembers what they said for the next day a lot of times. So your best bet is to try to get it early in the evening where the kids have gone to bed or playing or doing something else so that your buyers and sellers can concentrate. So you want to make this time frame anywhere from 6 to 9. The alternative earnest money deadline is something that you have to give, or the buyer has to give their earnest money to the title company and or the agency that's holding it. The bottom line is, I would make this anywhere from 3 to 5 days after acceptance. That gives your buyers time. If you're going to meet them, they can give the check to you. You can take it to the title company. I will also tell you, if their title company is up north, if they have one south, you can take it to any of their branches. You don't have to go way up to Westminster to drop off an earnest money check. So if it's Guardian Title, Heritage Title, Land Title, First American Title, whatever it is, they have offices everywhere, and it's the closest one to you or your buyer to drop off the earnest money. The next date in our contract is record title deadline and tax certificate. This is the deadline in which the listing agent needs to get the title commitment and the tax certificate to the buyer. I would make this a week and a half to 2 weeks out because of your past your acceptance date. This way, there's enough time. Where you're going to run into problems getting tax certificates are usually in January, because everything changes in January, and there could be a time in which you may not get it on time. But they do try to do that. And then if it's not on time, you're going to have to maybe do an amend extend to get it on time. Record title objection is the date, and you want to make that about 3-4 days after you've received your title commitment. This is something that you and your buyer read through. You're not the expert. If there's a question, please direct them to the closer of the title company that's being used. Off-record title deadline is the deadline in which your buyer says, hey, I wonder what that vacant lot behind this house is. He researches it and finds out it's a car wash, or it's going to be an apartment building, or something he doesn't like. He can get out. You're going to object to it on 3 to 5 days after. You make your title deadline and your off-record deadline the same. You make your objection deadline for title and your off-record title objection the same. This way it's all clear. And so if they don't like what they have on their off-record title research, then they can object and they can cancel. Now, let's assume something is in the title policy that comes, the title commitment, and this is not something you like, so you're objecting to it, but you have to resolve it. And I would say 2 to 3 days after this deadline up here, okay? And a lot of times it could be, there might be a tax lien, or there might be an IRS lien, or there could be a mechanics lien. Those things have to be taken off, and so you can convey clean and clear title. Now, on third-party right to purchase approval, we don't use that here. That is something that's used in the high country, in where you have different condos that have to have a whole, has an agreement in their bylaws that the HOA has to give them a yes answer to whatever they're, whoever's going to purchase it. Now, the association doc deadlines is the responsibility of the listing agent. In paragraph 7, you have to get that whole list. If you're listing a property, then have the title company get it. It's a $150 charge to the seller, but it's better than them not getting all the correct documents in time. Again, you want to tie that date to your record title deadline. And if there's any objections to what's in that association documents, you want to tie it to their objection deadlines. So you have all of those things. If you're going to terminate, you're going to do it pretty early, pretty quick. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. Now, the next one that comes up is the seller's property disclosure deadline. This is the document that the listing agent gives to the selling agent to pass on to their buyers. It is, the buyers are going to receipt for it. Doesn't mean they agree with it. It means they're receding for the seller's property disclosure. Now, what you're going to see is if this property was a rental, what's going to happen is the listing agent's going to say, I don't have a property disclosure, which is fine. Then what they need to do, the problem with that is the seller thinks that's going to protect him from something that's a known adverse effect to that property, and it doesn't. But a lot of times investors don't fill it out, which is okay. Now, if this is a lead-based paint disclosure house built before January 1st, 1978, then what happens is that you get a lead-based paint disclosure. It must come from the listing agent, and you want to make this date probably within the first 2-3 days after acceptance, so you get it pretty quick. And then as we go farther down, you'll turn around it within 24 to 48 hours and send it back to the listing agent. Now, your next grouping is your credit and loan and credit. Now, the new application deadline is, don't put the word complete, don't put the word done in here on the dates. Put a date, and it's usually the day after acceptance. In order to comply with the lender's TRID rules, you have to have an address and a legal description of a property. And if you don't have that, you have not completed your application with the lender. So you want to be sure to put the deadline the next day after acceptance. That way they have everything and you're good to go. Now, the new terms deadline, you want to make anywhere from 7 to 14 days after acceptance. This is the responsibility of the buyer to talk with the lender to find out what terms are available, and they may have already discussed this. But once they accept the terms and sign off on them, and it goes past your date, then what happens is they cannot terminate the contract based on terms and conditions. And this is real important for your buyer to understand. They have to know that what they've accepted. The new loan availability deadline is whatever the loan is that the buyer has said, I'm good with, and it's still available at closing, then that means they're good to go to closing. But if the buyer decides that they don't like what they've accepted, they're going to lose their earnest money, guys. It's a real important fact. They will lose their earnest money. And if that program is available and they choose not to go forth with the closing, they will lose their earnest money. So number 16 through 21 does not apply here. It's a rare case that we use them. And if you do, give me a call. Appraisal is usually done anywhere between a week and a half to 2 weeks prior to closing. It's before the loan deadline or loan availability deadline. So you want to make that pretty early. So it's usually a week and a half to 2 weeks. I'd make it as 2 weeks if you have enough time. Be careful of a 30-day closing. It's tough to get these things accomplished, okay? And if you can, you need to check with the lender to make sure that they can actually close in 30 days. Much of it depends on how far they're doing things, how far along in the loan they are. So now we want to be sure we have a deadline. Again, it's normally, excuse me, it's normally a week and a half. It could be earlier. And then your objection, I know these dates don't coincide properly, but this is what it is. Objection is about 2 to 3 days after receipt of your appraisal. So if your appraisal does not come in value, then what happens is you have to make an objection, send a copy of the appraisal to the listing agent and figure out how do you resolve this. So you want 2 to 3 days after your objection to resolve the problem with the appraisal number. We're not seeing quite as many of those as we did in the early part of the year in last year. So be sure if your people make an offer that we believe it's going to appraise. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. New survey, ILC or new survey deadline. You want to make that. Again, a week and a half to 2 weeks prior to closing. And the reason you do that is to be sure that you have enough time. Now, make a note that on a condo and a townhome, you don't usually you will not get a survey or a new ILC. So if you're making an offer on a townhome or a condo, you don't have to put any dates in here. So now we're going to get it again a week and a half to 2 weeks prior to closing. You want to put those dates in here, and you put a couple of days after to having an objection, and you want to have a day or two to resolve anything. Most of the time, a new survey is used in acreage, and ILC is usually lot and block. And that is a requirement of a lender and or a title company. Any questions on this segment? Okay. Now we go to water rights examination. In the contract, you check the box does or does not have the right to examine water rights and mineral rights. So these two dates, if you're normally they apply when you have acreage. And what happens is it takes anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to examine either water rights or mineral rights by the appropriate attorneys. So when you write an offer, please keep that in mind. If there are water rights and mineral rights, you have to find out how long will it take a mineral right or a water right attorney to examine. And again, keep in mind, it could be 4 to 8 weeks. So in the inspection termination deadline, in your inspection objection, you do one or the other. So you have a house, you're going to do an inspection. However, you've got a termination deadline in here, and that means we didn't put anything for objection or resolution. That means we're just going to inspect. If we don't like what happens in the inspection, we're going to terminate. But if you put all three, like I've done here, you're going to have an inspection. And based on what they discover, we may or may not give you an objection or a termination. So now we're going to give an objection. We only have 3 or 4 things. And now it goes to the seller, and you and the seller will resolve in a couple of 3 days, depending on what the issues are, usually 2 to 3 days, maybe a little longer, what those issues could be. So you resolve and everybody moves on, or you get a credit at closing for the seller not doing it. You just get a credit and it brings less to the table for the buyer. So this way, everybody knows where you're standing. So now on a property insurance termination deadline, this is the responsibility of the buyer. Once you've gone under contract, your buyer needs to call their insurance carrier, given the address of the property and where it's located and all the pertinent information, and decide, do you like the information you're getting on your insurance or you do not? If it requires floodplain insurance, that's going to up the monthly payment substantially, and it may not qualify. So this is something you don't want to mess around with. You want to get done early. Make sure, because the binder will be sent to the title company and the lender, and make sure that all these things are appropriately done. But you've got to do it pretty early, because we have areas in the city that are going to require floodplain insurance. You're not going to get it because of fire, possibly, or it's going to be very high. So don't let them mess around and say, well, I'll check it just before closing. Don't do that. Make sure it's done in the earlier process, and it has to be done by this date. And I make at the same time as the inspection termination deadline and the objection deadline. That way, everything's out of the way early.
Donna, can I ask, I think there are still people that do this differently. So I just want to make sure what you're saying is line number 30, inspection termination deadline. If we were going to do a normal inspection and we had the idea that there were probably things that were going to come up, we would only put the objection and the resolution deadline. And if it wasn't resolved, it automatically terminates. So we would leave.
No, you have to give,
blank.
no, you have to give, let's say we get our inspection And you've got all 3 dates, which I encourage you to do,
Mhm.
okay? But there's 25 items on the inspection objection list that the buyer wants fixed.
Mhm.
And some of these are major, let's say.
Mhm.
And after you talk to your buyer and say, do you really want to go through with the sale? And they go, really, I'm not sure I do. So you can terminate. You get to terminate or you get to object. You cannot do both. So let's say you have an inspection that only has maybe 5 or 6 things on it. Now the buyer wants to object because those aren't really biggie things, but it could be clean and certify the furnace. If the certification is not met, then the furnace can't be certified, then a new furnace will be replaced. So maybe that's the only item on there. So I would object to that and see if you can resolve with the seller what has to be done here, okay?
I think we're saying the same thing, but if there's no resolution, if you just can't come to a resolution that both like,
It dies a natural death.
okay, so.
Yeah.
But you would have all these dates in there still, except the termination date is before the resolution. So does that,
You
make a
either do one or the other. So
Right,
if
I'm
you're
asking,
given a
do you leave-
termination date, there is no objection and there is no resolution. Does that make sense?
right, so you would leave that blank is what I'm asking, if you were
No.
planning on objecting.
No, you want to put something in there. You don't know if you're not going to plan objecting, okay? So in other words, I do the inspection and I think it looks great, and we discover there's 25 issues.
Mhm.
So buyer wants to terminate, you're good. You don't have to give an objection deadline and you don't have to resolve.
Mhm.
So you're giving the buyer a choice. Either you're going to terminate or you're going to object. Does that
Right.
make sense to you?
It does, I think, like I said, I think there were people that were doing it differently after the contract update, and I just.
Correct. And they did it wrong,
Okay.
okay? Because what they were thinking is I can give an objection or a termination. You have to do one or the other. And they were using that incorrectly based on last year's contract.
Okay.
So what you have to remember is if they find too much wrong with the house and they're not happy with it, they can terminate. Or they can say, hey, we'll give these 25 items to the buyer, the seller, and see what they'll repair and what's important to you. Okay, so then it's when the objection and the resolution come into play.
Okay,
Okay, yes, you're
Mhm.
right. They were using them wrong.
okay,
Okay, due diligent document delivery and objection. So now we have a house and that finished basement was done in the last 2 or 3 years. You want to go and search out if there were any permits pulled, and which usually it's a 50-50 shot if they were. So you could ask for that. Normally there might be nothing in here and you can leave the dates out if you don't have anything. Okay, so if you object to something like it wasn't permitted and you're going to object to that, you may or may not resolve that. So be careful what you ask for, but I'll be sure if it's a lease, you put a lease thing that would be in your due diligence. You want to review the lease of a solar or hot water tank or whatever it is. And you have objections to something, or you don't like what the lease says or can't take it over or whatever, you want to object. So be aware of what you're asking for in your due diligent documents, okay? Now, conditional sale deadline means that you have a house under contract, your listing. It's going to close on November 4th. We've done the inspection. We've resolved the inspection. Everything's going forth. We're just waiting to close. You put your date that you're going to close in here, and then you go to additional provisions and you state that the house at 123 Main Street is under contract. It's due to close on November 4th. And we have completed the appraisal inspection and just waiting to close. So it's a contingency in the contract. If you don't close, then you don't lose your earnest money with this sale. So it's up to a seller whether they're going to agree to give you that contingency or not. So we're seeing more contingency offers come in. So now our next one is lead-based paint disclosure. Lead-based paint termination. Up here, remember we had a lead-based paint date that they gave us the lead-based paint document, which the top part is the seller, the bottom part's the buyer. Everybody's cool. They've checked the appropriate boxes. And now we're going to give that back to the listing agent. You want to make that after you've received it, you want at least 24 to 48 hours to maybe 72, but you don't want to make it a long time frame. You want to get it signed and returned. If all parties don't sign that document, it's an $18,000 fine per person. The office does not pick up that tab for you, just to let you know. And it goes up every year with the cost of living. So now we have a closing date. We're going to close on X date. We're going to have possession same day as closing. And I want you to put a time in here. A lot of people will put in DOD, delivery of deed, all kinds of crap that goes in here. Put a time. If you think you're going to close before this time, then do a quick A&E, and amend extend, send it over before closing and get everybody to sign it at closing. Not a big deal. Your acceptance date is past, depending on what the MLS says. You want to be sure that you've got a reasonable time in here. Hi, Mr. You want to call the listing agent. How much time do you need to get this offer accepted? And how soon? So you, based on your conversation, again, I would not make it too late into the day, but depending on morning or midday or late afternoon, any of those are fine. But always try to have a conversation with the listing agent to make sure that everybody's on the same page to being able to answer the offer back. So who's got any questions in the segments that I did? This is a short segment, by the way. Thomas, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, if you get to writing these offers and you have questions on the dates, just give me a call and I will be happy to help you with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, anything
Thank
else?
you. No.
Okay. Well, it's Monday and everybody have a great day. And there's no class next week because it's the week of the school being out, fall break. So it's the following week, I think it's 24th is when we will do it again, and that will be listings. All right. See everybody next week, 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.